All right, we're just going to give this a few minutes for all of our participants to get into the room here. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us for our very first ever summer legislative Smackdown series, week 1. We've got a number of people joining us tonight. This is a big hot issue right now, as it should be here in Washington State and all around the country. Parental rights are under assault by our government on a national level and a state level and a local level. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a lot of the stuff that's been going on in Washington State, and this is being recorded. So if you have people that have been asking you if it's going to be recorded, it is being recorded. I think it should be automatically being recorded. Oh, it is. So if you have people who are asking you if it's being recorded, yes, it is, and we will have it available on Rumble and probably YouTube as well, although we don't know how long it would stay up on YouTube. So without further ado, let's get started. I am Julie Barrett. I'm the founder of Conservative Ladies of Washington, and we have been very involved in legislative action these last couple sessions, and especially this session. And it is our mission to educate and empower citizens to speak up and take action on a legislative level and make an impact on the lawmaking that's going on in your state. I personally was a citizen who had no clue about the laws that were being made until a couple of years ago, when they greatly impacted my family and my personal life and my child. And I woke up real fast. And so now it is my mission to educate and wake up other citizens and parents. And so tonight we are joined by Senator Mike Padden from the 4th District over in Spokane. We are also joined by Representative Jenny Graham, who is a House representative in the 6th District, the mighty 6th, also over in Spokane. And we hope to have Jim Walsh be able to join us shortly. His schedule, as you probably know, if you follow Jim Walsh at all, is very crazy. So we hope that he will be joining us here in a little bit. But I want to kick this off tonight. We're going to start with our legislators are going to share with you guys some of the laws that have taken place that got us to where we are. You're all probably very familiar with Senate Bill 5599. There's a referendum now underway to repeal 5599. And what this bill does is it allows children, minor children, to stay in a youth shelter or a host home without parental notification if they are seeking protected healthcare services, which is now defined as abortion and, quote, gender affirming care. And so this would allow, the child already doesn't need your consent, but now you won't even be notified. So your child could essentially go to school one day and tell a teacher that they want, a girl wants to become a boy. They could be shuttled to a host home or a youth shelter, and you wouldn't be told where your kid is, which is horrifying. And as a parent who had a child stay in a youth shelter without my consent, and actually was held hostage in a youth shelter in Seattle for 10 days, I can tell you that this is terrifying. And the people that work in these establishments, they do have an agenda, and their agenda is to get your child away from you. Especially, I think, if you happen to have views that don't align with theirs. And so I'm gonna start things off with Senator Mike Padden, who I connected with last session when I testified a number of times on a Senate bill that was around homeless youth health care was kind of the guise of this bill. And it sounds like something that wouldn't apply to you, right? Your kids aren't homeless. And so why would this bill matter to you? But there's the problem with these bills. They're very deceptive, and your child doesn't need to be homeless to qualify for this law under this bill. There's no proving that the child is homeless. And so it is very much an assault on parental rights. And so I don't want to take up more time, because we have got a wealth of information from these legislators that I want them to be able to share with you this important information. So without further ado, Senator, I'm going to kick it over to you, and I'd like you to share with our audience about the parental rights and the assault on parental rights here in Washington State.
Thank you very much, Julie, and it's really a privilege and honor to be here with these good folks tonight. I really appreciate the activity that the conservative ladies of Washington have been involved with in impacting the legislative process, and the number of folks that have signed in willing to testify or who have contacted their legislators directly or via emails or phone calls has really had an impact on a lot of laws. And we are really up against it. We're in a crisis situation in this state that has taken a dramatic turn, although it's been coming for many years, but recently it has accelerated a turn towards the left, a turn towards increased secularization of our society. And tonight we're talking about parental rights. But our opponents, at least a lot of them, believe that if there are any parental rights, they come from the government, and the government can modify them or take them away or do whatever. And we know, according to our Constitution, and we know that it's really a matter of natural law, that the rights don't come from the government, they come from God. And the government has no right to take those rights away. So it's very important that parents become educated, and all citizens become educated and know that what their rights are, and push back on some of these things. So we talked today about Senate Bill 5883, and that bill is actually law today, and it is from the 2022 session. So not the session that started this year, but the previous session. And it allows a minor, they say unaccompanied homeless minor, but there's no verification. So it's just really a minor to be able to provide their own informed consent for things such as so-called gender affirming care. And we know they've had this for abortion. There was a case years ago in Ballard High School where a 12-year-old girl was during the middle of the school day taken from her school, whisked over to an abortion clinic. They had the abortion and killed the unborn baby, and then taken back to the school and taken home, and her parents never even knew about it. And that can be done in our state, and that's bad enough. When the Republicans had control of the state Senate, which was about 2013 through 2017, I chaired the Law and Justice Committee, and we had hearings on giving parents that right, the parental notification, parental consent, and we're able to pass that bill out of the Senate Law and Justice Committee and out of the Senate Rules Committee. Unfortunately, that was about as far as it went. The Democrats, of course, controlled the House and governorship, but we were pushing back and doing something to try to protect parental rights. So that's my background. Is I kind of got started in all this because of the life issues way back in 1977 to 1980. I was a board member of Human Life in Spokane, and then ran for the House in 1980 and was elected and served till 95, became a judge, and then later in 2011, I ran for the Senate and have been there since. One of the other bills I'm very concerned with, and it somewhat ties in with 5883, is a bill that passed this year, Senate Bill 5768. And this was the Democrats became convinced politically that they could almost do nothing too extreme in promoting abortion, promoting our state as an abortion destination state, pouring money out for people to come to our state to pay for abortions. And then the governor, because he was concerned that there might have been a decision in Texas dealing with the FDA's approval of a chemical abortion drug, mifepristone, and he's
Senator,
convinced,
I'm really sorry to interrupt. Can you give me that bill number one more time?
yes, 5768.
Thank you.
Yeah, and so the governor spent over $1.5 million without any legislative authorization. It clearly violates the separation of powers. The legislature has the power of the purse. The executive branch does not, but he spent that money, and he was stockpiling these chemical abortion pills with the Department of Corrections because they have a pharmacy. And of course, what happened, at least the decision initially by the federal judge in Texas, was stayed, and the drug was still available. So we've got all these drugs may or may not ever be needed to be used. I mean, frankly, I hope eventually we win that case because the FDA did not properly do the research and certification of the drug, which has all sorts of side effects, harmful side effects on women. And in any event, the legislature, after the fact in this bill, okayed this purchase. Now, the shelf life is supposed to be about 4.5 to 5 years, but we have no idea. I am going to be seeking a public records request next week. It's all ready to go, assuming I don't get an answer of where these drugs were, what stage they were in when they were purchased. Have they been sitting around for a year or 2 years? I mean, we have no idea about that. But these pills, I could see this state putting them in vending machines, and based on the previous bill, 5883, saying it's fine for minors to access these pills without knowing the side effects. Now, this is absolutely amazing when you think that if your child wants an aspirin in school, they need the parents' permission. We have laws in this state, as I know Representative Graham is well aware. You cannot get a tattoo, even if you if you're 18 or younger. And so all sort of laws, of course, they've restricted our Second Amendment rights based on age, and a number of different things. So I'm concerned with that. On top of that, the budget, the operating budget for this year, there is an additional $15+ million to pay for folks coming into the state or help Planned Parenthood with covering their expenses and their advertising, and to encourage our state. I call it abortion tourism. The governor says we should become an abortion destination state. And it's particularly acute over here where Representative Graham and I are near the Idaho border. And when Idaho is a strong pro-life state, and yet, where this money is going to be spent, I think, to lure people into Washington. Now, Idaho passed a law, and this now impacts one other bill, and I'll, after that, pass it on to somebody else. But House Bill 1469, the so-called SHIELD law, prohibits our state from recognizing valid laws, legal orders signed by judges in other states if those are pro-life states. So, for example, Idaho has passed a law that it's a criminal offense to kidnap a minor and take that minor across state lines for an abortion or other medical treatment. And what we're saying by 1469 is we would not enforce that law. We would hinder it. I think it has constitutional issues. There's such a thing as the full faith and credit clause of the United States Constitution, which 1469 seems to clearly violate. And I'll end just with a shout out that people aren't just sitting around. I know you mentioned earlier, Julie, about the referendum, but also there have been a number of meetings with attorneys from the Alliance Defending Freedom, a wonderful organization, and they are looking very hard at challenging 1469 and other legislation legally. And there's some hope on that. You might remember 4 years ago, we had the abortion insurance mandate bill where employers, even churches, pro-life churches, were required in their health insurance to cover abortions. So the Cedar Park Church in Bothell, is it, Julie? I think Bothell or Kenmore, they have challenged that. And there have been some favorable decisions, similar cases for the federal court out of California, where the state had to pay the attorney's fees and damages to some churches there. So Alliance Defending Freedom is involved in that case, and we are hopeful that it will be successful in the next year or two. And Representative Graham and I can then say to our opponents on the left, we told you so, which would be great. Anyway, I'll end right there. Again, thanks so much, Julie, for putting this together.
Well, thank you, Senator, for being here and taking time out of your busy schedule. Before I pass this over to Representative Graham, I would like for you to, maybe you can touch on, I've put a little information out about this, and you sent me an article about this the other day, which I shared on social media, but every abortion bill this session was combined with gender affirming care. Can you share a little bit about why do you think, I have my theories, but from a legislative perspective, what's the strategy that they're doing there? Because all of that, now that those two are defined as protected health care and they're available to minor children without consent.
It's not completely 100%, but there's always been an alliance on both those issues. But there are, obviously, folks that are gays or whatever that are pro-life, and so it's not 100%. But I think they felt they could get support. Both those groups are core base constituencies of the Democratic political machine. So, not only are they here promoting these bills, but come election time, they are providing a lot of support, financial support, a lot of troops on the ground to help their candidates get elected. So they're very key to their, staying in power. And that's the thing that they are most concerned about. So I think some of that, they obviously don't share their strategy with me, but I would surmise that those are some of the things, and I think if they combine that, they can get even more support for the legislation.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I think it's probably, several fold strategy there with that political and financial motivation, for sure, part of it. So thank you, Senator, for sharing all of that. And now we've got Representative Jenny Graham, who is a fearless warrior over there in Spokane, and she is very much a fighter on conservative policies and issues that are very important to us as conservatives, protecting education, protecting our gun rights, huge advocate for victims, and very much a fighter against crime and proponent of public safety and law enforcement. And so, Jenny, I'm going to just open it up for you to share what you'd like to share regarding parental rights from a legislative perspective.
Thanks, Julie. And again, thank you so much for putting this together, and especially thank all of the people that are listening tonight, trying to learn about this issue and figure out, how you can help. This is absolutely a team effort. You can't change things without us, and we can't change things without you. So we do our best work when we have, a great partnership with the people that we represent. In keeping with the public safety side of things, I did introduce a parental rights bill. And unfortunately, because we're in the minority, the majority party would not allow the bill to have a committee hearing. And without the committee hearing, it can't advance to the floor for a vote. They wouldn't allow that either. So I'm just going to keep right on advocating. It's very telling to me that if you remember when we have the comprehensive sex ed bill that came up, I do literally remember standing up on the floor and, talking about that, the children do not belong to, well, we have to address the speaker. But that was my point. Children belong to their parents, not to the government or to elected officials. And, they didn't really say anything. They don't really argue per se. They just keep right on moving because they have the numbers to do it. When they have 58 members and we have 40, they have the numbers to pass whatever it is they want. So this is something that I'm extremely grateful for, is that there are people now that are starting really to pay attention. And the bill, Senate Bill 5768, this was one that we talked about on the House floor that has to do with the prisons being able to have the abortion pills. And, that really struck me because there was legislation passed that if you're a corrections officer and you rape somebody in prison, they're going to throw the book at you. But I was also a co-sponsor of another bill, and you'll have to forgive me, I don't remember the number right off the top of my head, but that one would protect incarcerated women from the transgenders that are being put into their prisons. And there are some of them that are raping the women that are there. So not only are we faced with a woman being a feeling at this point, there's no safety for them. And it's just outrageous that this is happening it just feels like we're in Crazyville. The things that you would think would never happen, we're actually battling right now. So let's see here. The SHIELD bill, I wanted to talk about this one too, House Bill 1469. So not only does this one prevent law enforcement or a judge from cooperating with other states, one of the other issues, that we have brought up is that when parents can't be notified where their children are, and police are not able to look into this either, we do in Washington state have a problem with human sex trafficking. And that is an enormous, definitely an enormous fear for me. If they are, you don't know where the child is, law enforcement can't look into this, you don't have any rights as a parent, and that child disappears, how are you supposed to be able to track them down? I think that it's a legitimate question to ask, especially in this day and age where we're actually seeing, there was in the Inlander part of an article that was talking about a transgender person, somewhere on the lines of Aunt Jeremy saying, my house is open, so if you want to transgender, I'm here for you. And the best part about it is that your parents can't do anything about it. They're not even trying to hide this at this point. And I think one of the other things that is really super important that I will bring up on House or Senate Bill 5599, if you were to go back and you were to watch the video from the floor debate, one of the saddest things that you would see is that I stood up as a conservative wife, mom, auntie, grandma to talk about what I have seen on social media, young people that transitioned and they were telling their lived experience, their stories about how their bodies and their futures have been harmed. And as I was trying to talk to the Speaker of the House, Lori Jenkins, about that, she literally turned sideways and looked at the wall while I was speaking to her. And this is at the same time on the majority party side that we're hearing them say, we see you, we hear you, we care about you. Apparently, though, they don't care if that person decides to transition and now they become a patient for the rest of their life, a medical patient. If they now get brittle bones, if they have cancers, if their heart or their lungs shrink down, there are some really serious issues that people that have gone through this were talking about. And they were talking about, as children, what happened? How did they find themselves there? How did they get from point A to point B? And it was really sad because some of the people were talking about that they had told their parents, you can either choose to have a live son or a dead daughter. Okay. And that's designed to scare the parents, into going along with this. What they don't talk about, though, is the fact that they're not being told all of the information for them to be able to make that decision. And there are a lot of suicides that happen once these poor individuals figure out that no, your problems are not going to go all away. And you're still going to have similar problems if you don't go through the help that you need, say, if it's maybe depression or anxiety, or maybe sadly that child was raped as a small, a child, and now they don't like their body. They're a girl, they don't want to be raped, so they transition thinking that that they would never be that vulnerable again. And this is one of the other things that they were talking about. It is actually in Sweden, which was one of the major countries for the transition. They've stopped doing it. They were talking about literally having 15-year-old girls whose spines are not fusing properly because of the puberty blockers. Now walking around hunched over for the rest of their lives. They can't change this. Or you have children that are on the autism scale that are super vulnerable to this. And they're not talking to them also about possibly being sterilized. They're not talking to them about surgeries that don't heal. And so now they have to deal with that for the rest of their lives, which is another reason why a suicide may happen. So the point that I'm trying to make with this, and I will say that this is personal to me. In my family, I have three, um, two nieces and a nephew, all from the same father. All three of them in Spokane that are dealing with being transgender or gay or something along those lines. It's like they have them pick something that if you are what they call a normie, you're boring. You don't get treated, you don't get special treatment. And I think one of the other things that I was able to watch was that there was a lawyer in California, a mother, who said, hey, I am a proud supporter of transgender and gay rights and moved to California and everything, until it happened to her family. until her daughter, she happened to overhear one day because of COVID going on, that they were calling her daughter by a different name, and then found out that the daughter's friends, like half of a Girl Scout troop, all were saying that they were bisexual or pansexual or something along those lines. It really got that mother's attention. And now, she is coming out. She was talking about the Catholic Church, that she had pulled her daughter out of the public school, put the daughter in a private school, was dealing with this, and the Catholic Church wouldn't help, wouldn't intervene. So she did a really good job of laying out some of the problems, how this happens. She is a real fighter. I would love to be able to meet her in real life, to try to help fight some of these things. I'm extraordinarily grateful to the people that are from Gays with Groomers. Whether you agree with that lifestyle or not, God, we do have free will. And, we are accountable for those decisions that we make. So I'm just very grateful that we are starting to see some people that are stepping up, to say, no, hands off our kids. We won't let them. They can't buy cigarettes until they're 21. They can't sign a contract. They can't. There's so many things that they can't do. They can't rent a car until they're 25. And how many times on public safety do I continually hear, well, they're not responsible for what they did because their brains are not formed until they're 25. So therefore, they can't be held accountable for these decisions they make because they don't understand. But the hypocrisy comes in, but they're totally capable at 8 years old of deciding to change their sex for the rest of their life. And you can't necessarily change that. There are things that are permanent. They were talking about voice changing, and that has to be changed with surgery. That's not going to just go back on its own. And I think the other thing that really hit me today, I happened to be listening to, I think it was the radio, and they were talking about baby parts that were being sold. And this had to do with humanizing mice and using those parts for that, where they actually had a list of what they were charging for these parts. Now, it's my understanding from listening to what they were saying is that we may not like that there is research that happens, but they are not supposed to be charging for those parts, and they've been caught doing that. I think that it's absolutely repulsive. But again, why, when I was at a Ponderosa women's group today, and there were a lot of people that had no idea what this legislation is, what actually is going on. And I am going to put some onus of this onto our media. I know Brandy Cruz did a really good job of covering this. She does a podcast, and she actually had Como 4 and the stranger contact her and say that she was spreading misinformation about what these bills do. And I'm super, super happy to see that she has not backed down. There's an event that they're hosting in order to be able to get people to sign, Referendum 101. She's younger, she's engaged now, wanting to be married. I'm sure they want to have children. And she did talk about the parental rights. But I think, when we're talking about parents who may not be able to necessarily grasp what it is that's going on, because I will tell you, I've had people come after me, oh, they can't do surgeries without parental consent. Well, what do they think abortion is? Right? I mean, they surgically remove the baby, that's surgery. And these new bills do absolutely allow for that. But we don't have the media that's telling the truth about what these actually do. And, I think that that's really sad because they're a business no different than any other business. They're responsible for the product that they put out. And if their business is to inform the public about certain things, they're failing miserably. And not only are they failing, they're being biased in what they are reporting or deciding not to report. And it really does, I think that it's never been more important than now for people, for the community to literally start holding the media accountable for covering stories and doing their due diligence when they report something to get it right. And if they do make a mistake, which they often do, they're the worst offenders of misinformation and disinformation. And then they decide whether they're going to correct it or not. I do hope they deal with that at a congressional level. I think we're way past needing to do that. But, I don't know, you guys, maybe this is the wake up call that we need. Maybe this is that line in the sand where even liberal parents now are starting to say, whoa, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for this. This is not what I support. Keep your hands off my kids. So.
Well, that is certainly what we're hoping. We're hoping that these egregious bills are egregious enough to wake parents up. And I think, you made a good point about the media and that they're basically, puppets for the left and putting out their messaging. And so it's important that we're having things like this where we can educate people about the truth and what's really going on. And it's all in the bills. It's just that people don't read them. And so thank you, Jenny. Thank you for sharing, and we'll bring you back in for Q&A. Welcome. I'd like to welcome Representative Jim Walsh to the program. Hello, Representative Walsh. I'm going to kick it over to you. I kind of filled you in off to the side as to what we've already covered tonight. And so if you would kind of take the floor and maybe you can share with us some kind of, how did we get here? Because it's been a long road.
It sure has. Senate Bill 5599 is the flashpoint. It is the place at which I think they've gone too far. And this agenda, and it is an agenda, is come to the point that people understand that this is part of a system that they don't want any part of. And the agenda has nothing to do at its core with sexuality, sexual identity. That's really just a tool, a front that the supporters of this series of bills have used. If we're going to put it in the right context, we need to go back a few years and we need to look at what started with the so-called mature minor doctrine in this state. Not a single bill, but the result of a series of bills that set what is essentially like a emancipated minor status for children in the state of Washington to receive a number of different kinds of services, primarily health related, but some are not even really health related. The purpose of the mature minor doctrine, the immediate purpose, was to make abortion available to any young girl who could get pregnant. And the rest of the mature minor doctrine really followed from that premise and allowed for other kinds of medical care to be administered to children before they were adults without the knowledge or consent of their custodial parents. And even the mature minor doctrine is not an end in itself. These are all policies put forward by people who want to drive wedges into the nuclear family and want to make individuals the wards of the state. And they want people to think in terms of their loyalty and their sense of identity as directed to the collective, as directed to the government, not to themselves, which is where I would like to see it, or their nuclear families, which is where many people would like to see it. Um, and so really it's using healthcare, it's using education, K-12 education, it's using even sexual identity as excuses, as fronts. The real purpose is to redirect an individual's sense of self away from themselves or their immediate family and to the state, to the collective. And this is not new stuff. I mean, in ancient times, this is what Sparta did to its citizens. It robbed them of a sense of individual identity and gave them a sense of civic identity. More in our time, it's been a staple, of course, of Marxism, communism, to rob individuals of their sense of individuality, of a self-identity, and give them a collective identity. And no one, at least in this nation, in this country, in this state, would agree to that on the face of it. But if you couch this destruction of the sense of self in emotional terms of access to health care, of protection against violence, you use those cheap emotional appeals to do some really nefarious stuff. So the mature minor doctrine, which was not a single bill, it goes back in our state, Senator Padden knows as well or better than I, 20 years at least, maybe even a little further. And they've been sort of building it in increments over that time, really is the activator here. 5599, of course, is narrowly focused, and its supporters emphasize that over and over again. It doesn't do this, it doesn't do that, it doesn't do the other thing. It really is only about shelter, which strictly speaking is true. But it does incorporate these troubling terms, this strange use of the term affirmation, and these strange kind of triggering terms about matters of concern and protected healthcare in ways that drive wedges into families. But the focus of the bill is on shelter, so that individual minor children who run away from home can be hidden from their custodial parents or guardians if they seek shelter in these youth shelters, which are fairly well defined in existing law and practice. And then this new thing, this host home, which is a variation on a shelter, but is also troubling. The host home is not as well established in law and in tradition. It's a new thing. It is a place where a child can go to stay if they are convinced that they're being not affirmed by their parents. And I know a lot of people in the state are concerned that the host homes, because they're not as well established in tradition, would end up being tools used for human trafficking and further abuse of children. And again, children hidden from their custodial parents. We also need to look, we've talked a little bit about some of how these gender affirming surgeries, treatments, therapies are treated. That also isn't in 5599. It's in law that was passed several years ago. And the way that law was justified was that it was a consumer protection from bad treatment by insurance companies. The rationalization was that the state would make insurance companies pay for certain surgeries that normally insurance companies treat as cosmetic surgery. That is the mastectomies, cosmetic mastectomies, and things like the Adam's apple shaving and other therapies and surgeries that are generally considered cosmetic. The state law said that insurance companies could not treat them as cosmetic. They had to treat those surgeries as essential or life-saving surgeries. And so they were generally supported under that premise that it was holding the insurance companies to account. But really what it did is it set up those cosmetic surgeries as essential services of the state, that Medicaid and state programs would have to pay for them. So it was sort of a clever play there. And then, of course, 5599, and I know you've already talked about this some, interacts with more recent law, particularly 1469, House Bill 1469, the so-called SHIELD law. And what that does is that expands the reach of 5599 and hiding children to children from other states, effectively. So these are troubling things, and it's really important we not, for the sake of Referendum 101, we need to emphasize it is focused on 5599. But when we talk about policy in general, and we talk about the damage that these policies do to families and to children, we need to keep in mind this is just one piece of a puzzle that has many pieces. And the purpose of the puzzle, the picture in this puzzle, is one in which children do not identify with their families. They do not have a strong sense of self. Their sense of self is defined and structured as part of the state, as part of a collective. And that, to my mind, is profoundly un-American. And we need to defend the child's right to self-definition. We need to defend the child's right to a sense of sturdy independence in who they are and confidence in who they are. And not this idea that they need to be hidden in order to pursue their preferences. We need to let people know that they are strong, that they are good, and that they are free to make the choices in their lives that are best for their lives, and not need the embrace of the collective in order to realize who they are and what they want to be. We are individuals, and our state government exists and our federal government exists to protect individual rights. And we need to get back to that. So I hope that wasn't too far back and too broad, but I think we need to think about these bills and these referendums in the larger context of what they mean. And they are profoundly anti-individual, and I believe anti-humanist. They are vicious, dehumanizing things. And we have enough of that in this state. We have enough of that with our drug policies, with our housing fumbling. We're dehumanizing people too much, and we need to get back to public policy and law that recognizes the individual human's dignity, and but does not grant that dignity. Another malprop and crazy notion we get in Olympia is that the government gives people dignity. Of course, it does not. Dignity is inbred and born. Dignity is in you because of who you are and what you are. All that the government can do is recognize and honor that dignity that's innate in you. And in government, we get too arrogant. We think we are the ones who give people dignity, and that's all kinds of wrong. Anyway, I hope that covered it, Julie. And we can, of course, take questions. That's always the best part.
Yeah, that was great. And thank you for going back to the mature minor doctrine. That really is helpful for people to understand kind of how that kind of is the launch pad for a lot of the bills that came after it, and sort of, I always like to call legislation a web, right? No individual bill is working by itself. It always somehow connects to something else. So it's all this grand spider web of garbage. So thank you, and I'll bring you back in for Q&A. So I know that Alex has some information that she wants to piggyback on that. So let me introduce to you all Alex Chrostowski. She is the Washington chapter leader for Gays Against Groomers, and she has been very effective in fighting these terrible bills alongside of us this last session, and has been working really hard to inform parents about all these anti-parent laws, as well as has been really active and collecting signatures on the referendum. So she is a fighter and working very hard. And so, Alex, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Julie. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here tonight. I hope all of you were paying very close attention to Jim Walsh. Everything he said was completely spot on. I think a lot of parents out there get, they get caught up in their lives and they're not political beings. And so these types of things sneak up on them. And the truth is that, session after session, these bills build on each other. Our organization, Gays Against Groomers, is not a political organization. We're nonpartisan. So I will say, though, that legislatively, this issue is very much political. You see it coming from largely one direction. But that's not true of the parents. That's not true of our citizens on this issue. We are very complex people. So what I want to talk about with 5599 is that there's a couple key pieces to the legislation that are really important to note. So the very first section of that bill went out of its way to say that any person, any youth shelter, licensed or unlicensed, or host home could shelter these children. And that should alarm everyone from the beginning, because what that's effectively saying is that there is no greater concern than getting children away from their parents. If you are unlicensed, if you are a host home, and if you are just, say, a supportive neighbor or someone else in the area, teacher, even in the case of what happened in California, there's no safeguard for how to check these people, how to vet them. So this opens up a very dangerous precedent for sex trafficking. It provides a legal cover for sexual predators. And then there's what the bill is intending to do, which is to separate children from their parents, to get parents out of the picture, and to really facilitate gender affirming care. I would like to reiterate to everybody in the room, this is not care. This is experimental. Even the proponents of this type of medicalization know that it's experimental. They've said as much. They do not know what the exact dose of testosterone or estrogen needs to be. They do not know what the prolonged effect of puberty blockers is. We're just starting to understand how detrimental they are to children, because they were never designed as puberty blockers. They were designed to chemically castrate sex offenders. That was the original intent of the medicine, of what we are calling puberty blockers. They were never designed that way. We just happen to be using them that way now. So that's something to keep in mind with this, is that this is extremely experimental and they know it. There's several different lenses that people choose to look at this through. They like to look at it through the lens of conservatism. They like to look at it through the lens of parents' rights, which we're here to discuss tonight. And so there's many different ways to look at this issue, but from the perspective of gay people, this is really the new conversion therapy. The entire social atmosphere, and Moms for Liberty could probably attest to this, the entire social atmosphere in schools, in the family structure, even in churches, is completely different than it was 10, 15, 20 years ago. When I came out, 11, 12 years old, something like that, there was no incentive to be gay. There was no incentive for any of these things. That is not true now. There is a huge social incentive structure for children to identify this way. And that's a real, whenever you look at legislation like 5599 or 1469, you have to keep in mind that the entire social dynamic has changed with children. It's changed dramatically. It's become very regressive. All of the hard work that we tried to get away from categorizing people according to sex stereotypes is now full center back, on its face. that's what we're doing. If a little girl likes trucks and likes to play in the mud, well, she's a boy. If a boy likes to wear his sister's clothes and play with his mom's, costume jewelry, well, he's a girl. Very regressive, very disgusting, and very homophobic. And so that is another way of looking at this issue, is that it is deliberately taking children and confusing them at the earliest possible moment. And parents need to be very aware of this. I urge everybody to start paying attention to the legislation that is coming across your state's desk, paying attention to what is coming across nationally. California is about to pass a bill, AB 975, sponsored by Scott Wiener and Lori Wilson in their state. And it is effectively going to make misgendering your child or refusing to go along with gender affirming care basically child abuse, literally legally child abuse, and that will be grounds to for the state to take your children away. And why this is so alarming is because, like almost any law that California passes, it almost assuredly comes to Washington. I would be shocked if this doesn't become a bill in December or for January session. I would be shocked if that is not the next step. They've already dropped hints that that is exactly the direction they wish to go. And this is a quote from Lori Wilson so that you guys can all understand that this is exactly where their heads are. She said in reference to this bill that affirming is in the child's best interest. And then she said some other fluff. And then she continued on to say that through the care, it should be determined whether they are actually whatever they say they are. Well, that's meaningless because all current therapeutic practices in our country are following the affirmation model, which means they're not allowed to question a child or push back on a child if they say this. So effectively, what they're saying is if a child says something, that's it, and that's done. It's a done deal. And so it's a very big problem. I cannot overstate that enough to parents who are listening. This is a real concern. And if we do not start making this the number one issue that we vote on, if we don't start making this the number one issue when we consider moving, when we consider jobs, you will lose your kids. Do not necessarily trust your neighbors. You have to be very discerning with who you talk to and listen to your children, be more involved than ever because it's insidious and it's dangerous. So I'm going to turn it over back to Julie or Moms for Liberty. And that's all.
Thank you, Alex. That was really great information, and thank you for bringing up that California bill, because I do agree with you that is exactly the direction that they're heading. And as California goes, so does the rest of the country. That's definitely the goal, and not just blue states. They are infiltrating every single state in the country. So we have to be on top of it. And this, like Alex just said, this has to be our number one priority. This needs to be the hill that we will die on. I'm gonna, before I bring Joy and Anne Marie into the conversation, Jenny's got her hand up, I believe. Jenny, did you have something you wanted to add here?
Thanks, Julie. And Alex, thank you so much. You did an absolutely fabulous job really hitting on some important issues. I did want to say that I remembered now when I was talking about the humanized mice and the baby organs up for sale, that it was actually Tom Fitton from Judicial Watch that was talking about that. So that's a very credible source. One of the other things that we haven't touched on yet are the medical interests that are making a lot of money on these surgeries and not necessarily being held accountable if things go sideways. I know that Project Veritas has done quite a few interviews where they've actually recorded them talking about how they go about doing you know, these surgeries and who they do them on and how they handle the parents and situations. So if you get a chance to go to the Judicial Watch, I guess, website that they have, you might be able to watch some of those things where he's talked about Judicial Watch and then Project Veritas. So if you get an opportunity to look into that, I would. That way, you know, you're seeing it with your own eyes and hearing it with your own ears. Something has got to be done to start holding the medical interests accountable. What happened to do no harm? What happened to their medical oath? Does an oath mean anything anymore? I've thought about that when we were taking our oath, because I do take that seriously as a veteran and now as a lawmaker. When I take that oath, it means something to me. But other people that I watch take that same oath, turn right around and do just the things that they took an oath that they wouldn't do. So that's another thing that needs to happen is lawmakers and medical professionals need.
I got Jenny frozen. Jenny, can you hear me? Is Jenny frozen for everybody else? Yes. Okay. I'm gonna, while Jenny's frozen, I'm gonna, I've got a question here that I'm going to actually have Joy and Anne Marie from Moms for Liberty, the Kitsap County chapter, talk about. As you probably are well aware, if you're a parent, you know that the government schools are pretty much the primary vehicle for a lot of these anti-parent laws, and this is where they are pushing the agenda through. So the education and parental rights piece is very intertwined. And Sherry Larkin, who is a Conservative Ladies of Washington member and a candidate for the school board in Snohomish School District. Yes, we love that. She put in the chat, and so I'm going to have Joy and Anne Marie address this question. I'm wondering about approaching school boards about Senate Bill 5599 and the 2021 school counselor law. My concern is, how are counselors going to respond to a situation at school? Will they send children off to these host homes, or will they work to protect children and uphold parental rights?
That is a fantastic question and really important. And what this will tie into, there are 2 anti-discrimination school board policies in Washington state. Every school district has them. School board policy 3210 is your boilerplate in line with state and federal non-discrimination laws, that they can't discriminate against students based on race, color, creed, religion, or orientation. In 2017, policy 3211 showed up. And 3211 specifically isolates the gay community, specifically trans and other ideologies, so that they can hide this from parents. And what they're going to do, unfortunately, is 3211 was the catalyst for internal policies in our school districts that tell teachers and counselors, the form will come from the counselors, that informs the teachers about the pronouns, the bathrooms, everything. Unfortunately, because that is a personnel policy, there is not a whole lot that your school boards can do about it. Now, school boards can decide to not have policy 3211. You will get pushback. You need to be prepared for that. But just because WASDA says that something needs to be a policy, your school district can decide not to adopt that policy. Does that answer your question, Sherry?
Show the policy. Come on.
Anne Marie, you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay.
Awesome.
So there you go. There is the policy there. Can you see it?
Yep, there it is. So we have actually done a public records request for all 5 of our school districts here in Kitsap County, as well as Richland and Yakima. We have gone and done the research by popping onto different schools, school board policy on their websites. And this policy is everywhere in every single school district in Washington state. And they're almost all verbatim, copied and pasted, identical to each other, straight from WASDA. And the counselors are the ones that are actually handling all of this. When a child goes to a teacher or an administrator, then they are referred to the counselor who will walk through everything. We've seen the internal forms. It identifies what bathrooms they want to use, what locker room they want to use, what team they intend to play on, and it also includes which room they would like to sleep in on overnight trips for school functions. So this is actually something that is quite problematic. And one of the questions that at least Kitsap has had is, who isn't thinking out into the future about the legal ramifications of this? Because we know that rapes are happening in schools, in public restrooms, and everywhere. So it is definitely a problem. Let me know, Sherry, if we didn't answer, or if I didn't answer that question for you.
Joy, is there anything else that you and Anne Marie would like to share on this topic? And then I've got a question that I'd like Jim to answer.
Well, a couple of things that popped into my head. Representative Graham, when you were talking about trafficking and your concerns with that earlier, I wanted to make sure to share one of our favorite resources with Moms for Liberty, which is Courage is a Habit. They are on Twitter, they're on Instagram, they're on Facebook, and they have some wonderful factual information that parents, teachers, clergy, our representatives, anybody can go to and download those and show them to parents, use them in PowerPoint, and give actual visual, especially the concern that is going to be tying with bills like, or laws, excuse me, like 5599, the trafficking of transgender children and the trafficking of children in general. So that's one thing to take a look at. Piggybacking on what Alex said about the bill in California, AB 975, this is such a great concern to us that our chapters in California have already started talking to us about this, because they know on the left coast, it's monkey see, monkey do. So the biggest thing that if we have to give just one more thing about for our parents, you have to approach parenting as though this is going to come to your door. You cannot wait for it to come to your door. You need to practice prevention, preventative education. Jim talked about making sure that our children have a sense of self. And that is so important. And making how you talk to them age appropriate, obviously. You're going to have a different conversation with your high schoolers than you will with your 4-year-old, obviously, but don't wait for that. Definitely make sure that you are teaching your kids how to answer the question when they're asked, what is your pronoun? Being able to say, no, I want to call my mom and dad, or aunt or grandma and grandpa, whoever has custody. Those are all really, really important things to be doing with our kids right now, is to be preventative. Oh yes, and running for school board, which is awesome, Sherry. That's the other thing. That's how we change this the quickest, is right at home in our own backyards. And then that spills over into legislation.
Thank you so much, Joy and Anne Marie. Alex, I think you had something that you wanted to add to the points that these ladies were talking about.
Yes. So to answer the question a little bit more directly, when it comes to, are these school counselors going to respect parental rights, or will they go to youth shelters or whatever? It's really going to depend on the counselor. You might get 1 out of 50 that might call you instead, might not do the wrong thing, but most of them are going to facilitate that child not go home. Most of them are going to facilitate getting that child to the care that they are seeking. So that is the short-term answer. There've already been cases like this in California, cases like this in other parts of the country where that exact scenario has already played out. So that's exactly what's going to happen. And also to piggyback on what Joy was talking about with these conversations, not only, and to Jim Walsh's point about giving your kids a sense of identity, that's incredibly important. They need to have a family identity. They need to have an identity of who they are, but that's also a huge ask. And so part of my recommendation to parents is you need to start having these very uncomfortable conversations about what is trans, what is non-binary, what is gay. As much as a lot of conservatives they balk at that. And I don't believe in that stuff, so I'm not going to talk about it. Well, you've already lost because they're going to hear it somewhere else, and it should come from you. If you are a parent who is refusing to have those conversations, I'm sorry, but that's a problem. And I'll say it to you honestly. You need to have these conversations with them. I have these conversations with my kids in a very frank and age-appropriate way so that they already have the protection in place when they get to the classroom and they're told this garbage. You need to give them a foundation to stand on, and you need to encourage them to be strong and to stand up for their beliefs. They don't need to necessarily speak out in class, but you want them to basically disregard what their teacher is saying. And to that effect, we've also reached a point where I think it's time that we stop putting teachers on a pedestal. I think it's time that we stop telling our kids to trust their teachers, because trust and respect needs to be earned, and teachers by and large have lost all respect and credibility, and we need to start teaching our children to be wary of their teachers, unfortunately. So that's all I had to say on that.
That's so important and so right, that if you're not talking to your kids, guaranteed someone else is, and they're probably not telling them anything good. So please be talking to your kids. That is the most important thing you can be doing. I'm going to add to this because Sarah Garriott just added to the chat. And she is with Pierce County Moms for Liberty, and said, interestingly, our Washington OSPI selected 3211 and its corresponding procedure 3211P for some districts' comprehensive program review CPR this year. For example, our district had until April 30th to update their 3211P to change their designation of transgender students to gender inclusive schools and to add language to the policy regarding definitions. They also had to reference an RCW. Haven't seen the updated policy, but expect it any day. And that brings up a good point about just definitions. And I was watching a webinar yesterday that was done by the OSPI on the gender inclusive schools. And they have changed the definition of transgender, where you would think that is a child going from one gen, going from male to female, which you can't do. But transgender, by their definition, means anything other than identifying as a male or female. So it's just a huge umbrella term for anything. And so they're changing, as you are probably well aware, they're changing definitions on the fly every day. So really grounding your children in truth and reality is very important. And so if you have any questions, especially on this, because I know a lot of people, these are so connected, the parental rights and the education. So go ahead and drop that in the chat. And also, just to give you guys a heads up, next month, we're going to do a 2-part webinar on education, because education is such a big issue. We will have part 1 on Tuesday, July 11th, which will focus on the legislation on education. And then part 2 will be on Tuesday, July 18th, where we will talk about, that will be the conversation where Moms for Liberty comes in and Leave Finna and the homeschool people, and just giving you guys tools and options aside from the government schools. Had a question here that I am going to have Representative Walsh answer for us, because I do believe that I think I know the answer, but I'm not positive. So I'm gonna give it to Jim. Laura Potter wants to know, how is the state going to keep parents from filing malpractice suits?
Oh, for use of puberty blockers and other therapies. Well, I mean, ultimately, the state can't do that effectively. They'll try to use some of the medical shield law that exists in statute, but ultimately, I don't think that will be effective. I think there will be lawsuits over these therapies. It's true what Alex said about the use of these so-called puberty blockers. This is not, it's what they call an off-label use of these drugs. The drugs are really, they've got a nasty history to them. It did used to be called chemical castration, this depression of natural hormonal sexual development. And it was a barbaric treatment. I mean, they used to do it to punish, well, famously, Alan Turing, the great physicist, ended up getting on the wrong side of the law in England, and they forced him to take this chemical castration, and it made his life horrible. We thought we'd left all this stuff behind, and they found a new use for these drugs, which depress and sort of repress natural hormonal development and instincts in people, because they depress the hormones. It's bad stuff, and as some of you probably know, what real science there is in the use of these drugs is troubling. In girls, it seems to worsen osteoporosis and other bad outcomes. And in boys, you probably read or heard, it seems to have lasting effects on their ability to basically produce sperm and have children, even if they get off the drug therapy. So it's bad stuff, and we don't even know. I mean, the science is not settled on any of this, on what the long-term effects of these drugs are. So there will be lawsuits, but that's not the point. Again, the ultimate strategic goal of those who support these policies and these therapies and surgeries, it's not about the medical issue. It's not about sexual identity of an individual. It's about control, and it's about redefining what it is to be a person. I mean, you know, what's the matter with being a boyish girl or a girlish boy? I mean, why does that have to be changed with chemistry? I mean, why does that have to be changed with surgery? Why can't an individual just be who they are and find joy and find identity in who they are? Why do they have to be chemically or surgically altered to be something else? I'm old enough. I remember Annie Lennox, the great pop singer, who was very androgynous and kind of did her thing and was considered cutting edge and attractive and cool in those days. Why does she have to be actually made into a man? Why can't she just be Annie Lennox and be interesting? So it's, when we talk about the effects of these things, let's not get bogged down in the mechanics of puberty blockers or of top surgery or bottom surgery. That's really small change. The big issue here is robbing individuals of their individual identities and their individual self-expression. Let's champion that. I always try to think in terms of, when we frame these issues, let's say what we're for. Let's not just say what we're against. And that's where the courage is contagious piece is so important. I mean, let's be strong in what we defend and what we support, and let the bad stuff kind of fall away. So, but there will be lawsuits. Back to the question, there will be lawsuits without a doubt. And the state's efforts to hide it with some statute or some administrative code are going to not be effective. And remember too, switching subjects a little bit here, we were talking about the OSPI administrative codes and the guidelines there. It's an old thing, but I keep repeating it because it's important. The highest form of law is constitutional law, the Constitution. The next layer of law in terms of its power and its primacy is the revised code of Washington, actual statutory law. And then the administrative code is underneath both of those. And most of what's happening in the implementation of bills like 5599 of the comp sex ed policy is being administered by code, by administrative code. And that's the part when you say that OSPI is making stuff up on the fly, that's true, they are. And their ability to do that is by the use oftentimes of emergency code made under an emergency basis where they don't have to have quite as much public comment and as much review as normal to make administrative code. But remember, no legislator votes on administrative code. Jenny Graham and Mike Padden and I we never take a look at WAC, Washington Administrative Code. That is entirely the product of bureaucrats. And the bureaucrats at OSPI can generate new administrative code basically on their whim. And that's not good public policy, but it is the reality of what we're dealing with here. And it is a kind of turning inside out of how public policy is supposed to go, where really the lead is the Constitution, underneath that is the statutory law, and then administrative code is supposed to be really just a small thing about implementing the statutory law. And what we have in this state is tyranny of administrative code. The main way that law is done right now in Washington is by bureaucratic administrative code, and we have to move away from that.
Jim,
More of an answer than you were looking for, Julie, but
well, that sounds like a whole other webinar, the WAC and how we whack that mole, man. So we're getting close to 8:30, so I want to start wrapping this up. And as I mentioned when we started, our mission with Conservative Ladies of Washington is to impact legislation. And we want to engage citizens in that process. We want to educate you about how that process works, and we want to encourage you to participate in that process. And so, Jenny and Jim, I would like if both of you would take just a couple minutes and share from your perspective, what can citizens do during session in the off season to be impacting legislation? And I think I'm just going to mention this really quickly. I was in my driveway yesterday, and Senator John Lovett came. He was just doorbelling and handed me a legislative update, and he recognized me, and I introduced myself, and we had a good little laugh, and he was on his way rather quickly. But you know, the other side is out there talking about it, so they're working in the off season, and we should be too. So would you guys give us a couple of things that you think we could do? Jim, I'll start with you.
okay. Well, obviously help get signatures for Referendum 101. That's the immediate thing. The window of time is tight. The deadline by which the qualifying signatures have to be delivered is July 22nd. The organizers are using the date of July 15th so that they've got time to kind of assemble their petitions and get everything in order. But so we got about a month, a little more than a month to collect those signatures. The project got off to a good start. I don't know exactly where they are, although I've been talking to the organizers, but they're a good chunk of the way, maybe a third of the way toward the target goal of 200,000 signatures. And so it looks promising, but the window is always tight, and it's always a challenge to get a referendum qualified. That's the first thing. We are also working on an initiative. The timeline is a little kinder for the initiative that will positively assert and define parental rights in Washington state law. And that is initiative 2081. We're kind of levering back a little bit on that one because we want the referendum for the moment to be the focus and really get the signatures. But you will be hearing about initiative 2081 in the weeks and months ahead. That one has until December 31st to collect its qualifying signatures. And as I've mentioned before, that's a more proactive or assertive statement of what we like to see in state law. And lastly, talking about state law and WACs, which are supposed to be less than state law and all the other, this summer, make it your summer reading project. to read RCW Chapter 28A. That is the section of state law that defines education, K-12 education anyway, and some pre-K, some university level stuff, but mostly it's K-12. And it's tough. It's a lot of pages to read, but you can read it online in short bits, each section, subsection, and read it and read the law in this state on what parental rights in education are. And you'll have a better understanding what we're dealing with. There are parts of Chapter 28A that are good. There's a long ignored part of it that talks about teaching good citizenship and civic duty, which is something that gets ignored, but it's still in the books. Also know this, that parental rights trump even statutory law. The US Supreme Court has consistently said that parental rights, as we think of them in this country, are part of the equal protection concepts in the 14th Amendment to the US Constitution. Analogously, in the state of Washington, they are an offshoot of various sections of Article 1 of the Washington State Constitution, particularly those sections involving right to privacy, right to equal protection and due process. And it's that due process of law, those concepts, whether at the state constitutional level or federal, that are the protection of parental rights to raise your child as you choose and see best fit to raise your child. That is a constitutional foundational right. It is stronger than statutory law, and it is certainly stronger than administrative code. So your rights as a parent come first.
That's great. Great homework, Jim. And we've been dropping links to all this stuff as speakers have been talking, and Eric just dropped in the RCW that Jim was talking about there. So all of that is in the chat. All right, Representative Graham, what about you?
Well, Jim did a really good job covering those important parts, so I'm not going to recover what he's already covered. But I will say that kitchen table conversations are so very important. And if you're like me, you run into people that they don't want to believe that this is what it is that's happening. Oftentimes I hear, oh, the government wouldn't do that. So kitchen table conversations are important. And with the links and stuff that have been provided, try to get as much of that as you can, so that maybe during that conversation you can say, and I do this, please do not just take my word for what we're talking about. Here's information. We're putting this into your hands for you to look at this. I'm here to answer questions that you have. I'm here to engage in conversation with you and, work with you to support parental rights, to bring some common sense to the, the chaos that's going on right now. And most importantly, really start taking a stand, to protect our families, protect the rights of the parents and the rights for children to be children. And, when they go to school, to learn about reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and God forbid, how about life skills? How about life skills? I was at a ceremony today for the North-South Freeway where we were turning the dirt, and these projects don't build themselves. We have to have people that are in the trades to do these projects. So I just, like I said, I think when you talk about this, you may run into somebody that can be aggressive. Find your courage to just let them know that you care and you respect their point of view, that you're asking them questions. How do you feel about this? Read this. and let me know, how do you feel about this? Why do you feel about this? Figure out ways, you know, whether it's family or friends groups or church groups, or, you know, maybe elderly people getting together to have these conversations. And remember, all politics are local. All of them end up at your doorstep, whether we like it or not. If you do not pay attention to what is going on in your local politics, that's when you get blindsided by it. This is the best way for you to be involved, so that something that you don't like doesn't end up at your doorstep, and the things that you do like lower taxes and you know, safe neighborhoods, are things that you can put your energy towards instead of the things that we don't support.
That's awesome. Great. Thank you, Jenny. And thank you so much, Jenny and Jim, and Mike Padden had to ditch out at 8 o'clock because he has a very early morning tomorrow, but I appreciate your time. Also on our panel, we have Alex from Gays Against Groomers, GAG, Anne Marie and Joy with Moms for Liberty, Kitsap County. We've got from the CLW team, we've got Eric Pratt and Leslie Williams, who've been helping out behind the scenes. So I just appreciate everybody, your time tonight to put on this webinar. We will be putting together a compilation of all of the links and information shared here tonight. In that, we will have emails and social media links for you to connect with all of our panelists tonight, so that if you, which I highly recommend you do, Jenny Graham on her Facebook page shares a lot of these kitchen table conversation ideas on her Facebook, and of course Jim is all over Twitter and Facebook, and Alex is on primarily Twitter. So we will share all of that, so you know where to find people and you can get this information. And I know that all of the people on our panel tonight are very more than happy for you to reach out personally and answer any of your questions. So thank you all for participating tonight. Thank you for everybody that joined us. This is recorded, so you can watch it again later if you need to recap. And please do share this information, and we will be back again next Tuesday with elections and voting. So thank you very much for attending, and I hope to see you guys again next Tuesday.
Thank
Have a
you.
good night.